Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video and this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by that of Boxing Ego, where Mr. Boxing Ego he talks once again about Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder, who, of course, has pretty much fallen from grace from the past few years by losing to that of Tyson Fury, and of course, recently losing dominantly to that of Joseph Parker, who I believe was the former WBO champion of the heavyweight division. But of course, Deontay Wilder, in my view, he still had a decently successful career. It depends, I guess, what you mean by successful, and it depends on where you would rank him in terms of how great he was or how dangerous he was. But like I've always explained about Deontay Wilder, in my personal view, I think that at one point in time he was an A grade level fighter. He probably, when he was undefeated and the WBC champion, he probably would have been within my top 20 pound per pound. I don't think that he ever warranted to be within my top 10 pound per pound because I just don't think that he ever had the resume. And like I always asked about Deontay Wilder, how good would he really be if he actually finally faced those legitimate champions? Well, against Joseph Parker, it was a little bit hard to tell because I'm not quite sure if he lost to Joseph Parker because he would have lost to Joseph Parker even several years ago, or because maybe both of those fighters are a little bit different, and maybe Deontay Wilder, because unfortunately he always had a little bit of a limited skill set, but after the knockout losses to Tyson Fury, it may have even made him a worse version of himself, of course, and more tentative. And unfortunately for Deontay Wilder, in order for him to be successful, he cannot second guess himself. He cannot be tentative. He has to be very confident within himself, and he has to pretty much try to go for the kill. And if he isn't going to go for the kill, you're going to see a lot more faults within him where he's going to look even more limited than what he did before. Because Deontay Wilder is not a boxer. Deontay Wilder is a brawler. He's a guy that pretty much is a plan A fighter. That's why I said that he's pretty much the George Foreman of this era, just less accomplished. But, that doesn't mean, once again, that he was still not somewhat of a decent fighter for his generation. But we're going to talk about all that. Anyways, of course, now that he recently lost to that of Joseph Parker, he recently apparently has been removed from that of the top 5 rankings of that of the WBC, and in my view, very much deserved. It just is what it is, and I'm not trying to hate on Deontay Wilder or anything like that. I'm not trying to be super harsh here, but at the end of the day, there's only so much that I can give you when you end up losing to a fighter who overall, once again, has suffered 3 losses within the past several years, has not won a belt ever since he lost it to AJ Anthony Joshua, has been in and outside probably of the top 10 rankings, and then just last year got knocked out very brutally and viciously against Joe Joyce. And then you ended up getting completely dominated from round 1 to round 12 against that fighter and pretty much lost every single round. So in my view, there very much is a very fair point to put Deontay Wilder outside of the top 5. But the reason why I also like to talk about Deontay Wilder quite a bit is because the LDBC and new media and a lot of people in general, unfortunately, and this is a pattern overall with a certain amount of fans and a certain amount of fighters and other athletes as well. They love to play this victimization mentality, especially that of the minority groups within that of the westernized societies, especially within that of America, because what they want to teach you is to be a victim. That way you basically have no independence, and that way you have no self-strength. Just in my personal view, because when you play that victim role, there's only so much independent thinking and there's only so much self-respect that you truly have. And don't get me wrong, we're always going to make, there's always going to be certain excuses that we make. We're all very prideful at the end of the day, and none of us want to take a loss. None of us overall want to suffer a loss that bad, and there's nothing more humiliating overall than losing on the big stage like that of what a Wilder did, or what Lomachenko did against Devin Haney, or what Canelo did against Dimitri Bivol. In a boxing fight, it's a little bit more humiliating, and in a fight, it's more humiliating. I understand. But at the end of the day, for an analyzer like me, it's my job, at least the way that I view it, to not make excuses unless I think that excuse is 100% completely valid. And I'm sorry, but none of the excuses that Deontay Wilder, nor what the LDBC and new media made, they were never super valid. It just is what it is. They were all racial excuses because they were super mad that their pro-black figure, Deontay Wilder, ended up getting beaten up. It just is what it is. They like Deontay Wilder not just because he was a dominant black American fighter, but also because of what he stood for. And I get it to a degree, but at the end of the day, once again, you have to be logical, you have to be objective. And all these excuses that were made about the Fury and Deontay Wilder situation, unfortunately, it didn't really help anything else other than their own egos. It didn't help anything else other than keeping the charade and keeping overall the false prophecy of Deontay Wilder still being an undefeated fighter because Tyson Fury allegedly cheated, or at least cheated in the way that they tried to allege that he did. Even though there was no evidence against that of Tyson Fury, or clear-cut evidence that he had removed padding from the glove, or that he had stuck his hand lower into the glove and kept it there throughout the majority of the fight. Just all excuses that made no damn sense whatsoever, and to where there was no actual proof. But it is what it is, and unfortunately, the person that it affected the most is that of Deontay Wilder. Because not only did it end up getting within his head, but on top of that, he used those excuses to the point where, he tried to believe them. I don't think that he ever truly believed them 100%. Because if Deontay Wilder ever did truly believe overall that there was something up with Fury's gloves, or something up overall to that point, he would have also had to fire that at JD's. Because JD's was the one in his corner overall that was watching Tyson Fury's hand wraps and watching his gloves, not that of Mark Breland. And even Deontay Wilder, when Tyson Fury asked him that question at the press conference, he pretty much was stumped and he was silent because even he knew that it would have made no sense. So Deontay Wilder never believed those excuses in the first place. But unfortunately, these people that look to be as close to him, unfortunately, they think like losers. So unfortunately, at the end of the day, not only overall did they not help themselves or a certain amount of the other boxing fans or commentators that are watching, they didn't help out Deontay Wilder. But it is what it is. Anyways, let's get straight into the video. Let's see what Boxing Ego has to say.
Oh my God. Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to this day has been dropped out of the top 5. And we're live. Deontay Wilder has been removed from the top 5 within the WBC. He was highly ranked within the WBC, but after suffering a loss to Joseph Parker, the WBC has seen fit to remove him completely from the top 5. They don't believe he's worthy of that spot, and other people should be in front of him. So right now, I'm on the WBC's official website. Subscribe to the channel. Tyson Fury gets ready to fight Alexander Usyk of Ukraine. And
that's going to be a very interesting fight. That's going to be a very interesting fight because Fury, I would probably still say, would be my personal favorite to win that fight. But of course, he did not look that good over Francis Ngannou. And he did have he at least had 2 relatively tough fights against that over Deontay Wilder. And especially that third one, I thought that Tyson Fury, I think that he probably could have taken Wilder a bit more seriously. And I think that he probably was a little bit too lackadaisical in certain parts of that fight. And it damn near cost him to get knocked down within that of the 4th round. So Tyson Fury, and then of course against Francis Ngannou, he looked very piss poor as well. So, Tyson Fury is going to really have to be up to par against that of Alexander Usyk. But to be honest with you, I think that to potentially get the best fight possible, I think that whatever needed to happen ended up happening. Danny Dubois actually gave Alexander Usyk a little bit of a scare with that borderline body shot to borderline low blow, where it hurt Alexander Usyk very bad. And then of course against Fury, he damn near lost to an MMA fighter. So at the end of the day, I think actually that both fighters kind of needed that kick in the ass in order overall to say that, there's going to be certain things that even I have to improve on heading into that fight, especially Tyson Fury.
That is his next fight. He is the WBC champ.
And let me tell you this, if Tyson Fury does end up defeating Alexander Usyk, in my view, he'll be up there with almost any heavyweight in history, at least debatably. You can't have, all the belts within your era, have wins over Alexander Usyk, Deontay Wilder, and Vladimir Klitschko, and not be up there with anybody. And now I have a certain amount of people trying to tell me that, Fury wouldn't be able to compete with Mike Tyson and Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield and all the, good heavyweights of the past era. Are we really sure about that? Are we really 100% sure about that? That a heavyweight that at his best has proven that he has the great all-around game offensively and defensively. Sure, he might have certain flaws, here and there, but at the end of the day, Fury has shown that whenever there's a big fight, that he's going to come to the table usually very well prepared and usually very dominant. When you talk about Tyson Fury, there's never been a super close fight whenever it comes to an A-grade level fighter that he's fighting. The Klitschko fight was not super close. The first Wilder fight, really, in my view, was not that particularly close. The second fight was nowhere near close. And the third fight was, somewhat closer than the first half of the fight. But then the second half, Tyson Fury once again had completely dominated, and against Dillian White as well, he had, won every single round and moment of that fight as well. So I can't sit here and tell you, just in my view, that Fury would not be able to compete with some of the other great heavyweights of some of the other generations. Because I think even Wilder or Anthony Joshua or some of the other guys or Usyk, I think that they could potentially overall maybe give a run, for someone's money in terms of some of these fighters. I'm not saying that I would bet on them to win always, but at the end of the day, people love to say all this stuff, about certain current fighters that, oh, they can never compete with this past fighter. They can never compete with this guy. Well, is it really that they couldn't compete with them, or is it just because you're not letting those type of fighters go? Is it because that you have an obsession with those fighters and you don't want the current level of fighters to ever replace your idols? You have to be very careful with that.
Representing Great Britain, UK. But this is where it gets interesting. These are the most updated ratings. In at number 1, Anthony Joshua. So keep in mind, Wilder was like, I believe, the number 1 spot on the last list. But it just goes to show you, boxing is a what have you done for me lately type of sport. The top 3, he's been completely removed. It says Anthony Joshua, number 1. Frank Sanchez in at number 2. And rounding off the top 3, the guy that beat Wilder, Joseph Parker. Then they even put Ajit Kabayel, who just defeated that Game of Thrones looking dude with the
Yes, that one Russian fighter that's about stiff as a 2x4. Yes, I remember that fight.
eyebrows. He's at number 4. They even showing F.A. Ajagba more love. And he just fought some dude from Australia and hasn't really been active. Number 6, American heavyweight Jared Big Baby Anderson.
And listen, if you're asking me personally overall about the WBC rankings, I probably would rank Deontay Wilder above certain guys like F.A. Jagba and certain guys like that. But at the end of the day, Boxing Ego is correct. Boxing very much, especially within those rankings, is very much a what have you done for me lately type of sport. And Joseph Parker was not a champion at this point in time in his career. Joseph Parker was not looking, in my view, at the best point in time in his career, and just a year ago had been brutally knocked out, I believe within 11 to 12 rounds, over that of Joe Joyce, who also recently lost both of his fights this year to that of Zhang, the big Chinese gentleman, I believe. So once again, I can't blame the WBC rankings for ranking it that way, or at least putting Deontay Wilder out of the top 5.
Then you have number 7, Daniel Dubois, who just, he weathered the storm, I would say, with Gerald Big Baby Miller. That was a pretty fun fight on the same card that Wilder lost. And then finally, you get to Deontay Wilder. So he's still in the top 10, but he has been completely removed from the top 5. I don't.
Is Last War fake?
Last War is not a fake game.
Okay, so I downloaded the game. This is it.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say Wilder looks sensational at all versus Joseph Parker, but to drop him 6, 7 spots and put him by Philip Ergovich at 9 and newcomer Francis Ngannou and Martin Bakoli, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, once again, and this is why I like to review these channels, because they're so victimization mentality, and they love to bitch, moan, and complain overall about when they believe that a black American fighter, or when one of their favorite fighters, if we're just going to be real, when they believe that they're ever so slighted. But then when it comes to another fighter, if this were to happen to them, like Canelo or Usyk or something like that, they wouldn't give 2 shits about it. So the point is that you have to be very careful with this victimization mentality. You have to be very careful. And you have to take a look at it and say, okay, you know what? I understand that there's been double standards or there's been narratives, in the past before. But you can't take a look at every situation like it's the same. And you have to take a look at this and say, okay, is this something that's fair or is this something that's somewhat warranted? And at the end of the day, even though I have a great amount of respect for Deontay Wilder, and, if I were to rank him on my list, I'm not 100% sure how the WBC goes by in terms of their list. But I can't blame the WBC too much because Joseph Parker probably would have not even been within the top 10 anymore in terms of that of the heavyweight division. He had not been a champion in an extremely long time. And if I had to guess, maybe he was not super high on the WBC list. So at the end of the day, Joseph Parker, he had lost 3 of his fights, 3 of the most important fights of his career. within the past several years. He just lost by brutal, dominant knockout loss, last year. And then he gets in the ring and completely dominates Deontay Wilder from round 1 to round 12. So at the end of the day, I can't go after them too much for placing Deontay Wilder outside of the top 5. Because if we're really going to go there, who has Deontay Wilder? All the names that you just took a look at there, Wilder hasn't defeated any of them.
So let me know in the comment section what you guys feel about the WBC's top 10 list. Like, I mean, here's the other thing. People in boxing, especially the fans, but they get really dramatic. They get real dramatic when it comes to losses in boxing. I mean,
Right, they get really, really dramatic. So basically what that means for you, Boxing Ego, is that they get really dramatic, and I don't like it when they talk about my favorite American black fighters when they end up losing. But then when it comes to certain fighters like Canelo or Usyk or Vasily Lomachenko, then I'm gonna talk all the shit overall on them that I want to. Is that basically what you're referring to, Mr. Boxing Ego? And this is why a lot of people don't really take new media and the LDBC seriously, as they shouldn't.
Lose. And I understand some people blame Floyd Mayweather.
And don't get me wrong, I don't completely disagree with what Boxing Ego is stating. I think that, whenever a fighter suffers a loss, especially when they were a former undefeated fighter, that it has a great amount of impact on them. And him bringing up Floyd Mayweather Jr., I think that Floyd certainly has had an impact because of how great that he was, and him ending up undefeated throughout his career. I certainly overall think that it's had a greater impact because now a certain amount of fighters, not only overall are they waiting a very long time to sometimes get in that Manny Pacquiao, Floyd Mayweather type of fight for them, and they're facing less champions, even though Floyd fought a lot of great champions throughout his career. But, on top of that, they're also afraid to lose that because a lot of them will be compared to that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. So Floyd, in my view, had a great amount of impacts in boxing, both good and bad.
Listen, I'm not blaming Floyd Mayweather because, see, that's one of the misconceptions I hate in boxing, to be honest, where people say, oh, everyone's afraid to lose their O because of Floyd. You can't blame a person who, what do you want him to lose? He got to lose, so...
I certainly agree with Boxing Ego there. You can't expect overall Floyd Mayweather Jr. to want to lose or to give that up in his career. However, what I will say is this: sometimes after a trailblazer in a particular sport, or a guy that was so dominant in a particular area, sometimes it affects the sport both positively and negatively. I think that Mayweather did a great thing for a lot of boxers by telling them basically to be, set with their financial future. I also think that there's been a little bit of a negative because I think a lot of these fighters, I think that unfortunately it has suffered a little bit, just in my personal view. And it also just might be a little bit more of the era, not even just completely because of Floyd Mayweather, but I think that him being the undefeated fighter, every time there's a fighter that's about to come to 50-0, Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s name is always brought up. Just like whenever, someone is about to come to 5 championships, Michael Jordan's name is brought up. But certain guys, certain very impactful athletes throughout their career, sometimes they can have a great positive for their particular sport. Sometimes they can also have a great negative.
That's not...
Because everyone tries to be like that fighter when they're not like that fighter, or everyone tries to be like that athlete when they're not like that athlete. And they may not bring to the table what that athlete brought to the table.
Culture? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. And then some of the same people who actually advocate for this narrative that Floyd got people protecting their O's, they were the same people hating on Floyd, saying Floyd was bad for boxing and Floyd needs to retire and the game is better without Floyd. So listen to what I say. The things that I say, I don't care if they're popular. I don't care if they're unpopular. At some point, it's going to all make sense to you. But just
yes, especially if you're a wokey, and especially overall if you're on that pro-racial hive mind narrative.
Listen to what I say. How can you blame Floyd for fighters who are not taking challenges or preserving their O's and trying to remain perfect, but then you were the same ones hating on Floyd and saying Floyd was all that was wrong with boxing? It's like boxing fans, they want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yes, and you do a lot of the times as well. That's why you keep making excuses for your boy Errol Spence Jr. But anyways, let me also state this. I do agree with what Boxing Ego is stating here. I don't think that it would be fair at all to blame Floyd Mayweather Jr. for being undefeated in his career and to say that that was super negative for boxing. I think that unfortunately it's just a little bit of a carryover effect. Just like when you take a look at Michael Jordan, the way that he kind of played within his style. He was a shooting guard, and on top of that, he was a guy that took a lot of shots, and he was the main option for his team, and he wasn't supposed to be. Before you ended up, doing that, before the Michael Jordan era, the way that you pretty much won that of championships usually was with that of a great wing player overall, and also that of a great center like Magic and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or Kobe Bryant and Shaq, of course, a little bit later on, just to bring up an example, or Moses Malone and that of Dr. J, something like that. But then, of course, overall Michael Jordan kind of came along, and overall he was a great shooting guard, and he really didn't have a great big man on his team. And on top of that, he had Scottie Pippen, but I wouldn't say that Scottie Pippen was as great as some of the other, second players or combinations that I've seen. I would say that the Moses Malone would probably be greater than Scottie Pippen. I would say certainly that the Magic Johnson and Kareem duo was more talented than Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, because I don't think Scottie was on the level of either of those players, in my particular view. Even Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. But, anyways, when it comes down to it, this ended up, unfortunately with a lot of negative play, especially from that a lot of the shooting guards and some of the point guards that eventually tried to be shooting guards, like that of Allen Iverson, Tracy McGrady, Kobe Bean Bryant, Dwayne Wade. A lot of them always wanted to be like Michael Jordan. And that's why when you take a look in that early part of the era, so many of those guys shot in the low 40s, like that of Allen Iverson, sometimes Tracy McGrady, and some of those other guys, because they tried to be like Mike, and not everyone brought to the table what Michael Jordan brought.
They want to say Floyd's influence on the game. He's not the best fighter. He's not the biggest of his generation. All these lies. But then they want to put something negative on Floyd Mayweather. Like, you made fighters protect their oaths. I don't believe that, because this is what I do believe. I believe that at the end of the day, it's almost freedom of choice. So if you didn't like the old guard or the previous rule, like let's say it's a kingdom, and you didn't like the old guard, you didn't like the old king, the old emperor, then now when that person is not in power anymore and you become the emperor or you become the king, if you hated all these things that the previous king did, then now that you're in power, change them.
Right, but that's not how completely a lot of these fighters look at him, Mr. Boxing Ego. And they realize that a certain amount of the fans will say, that Floyd Mayweather Jr. was undefeated. You were not undefeated. Floyd Mayweather Jr. did this. Floyd Mayweather Jr. did that. You did not do that, because whether people want to admit it or not, a lot of people take a look at Floyd Mayweather Jr. now as the greatest boxer or the greatest fighter of all time. You can agree with that. You can disagree with that. That's up to you. I'm not saying that necessarily he would be my confirmed greatest of all time, but he certainly is in that conversation for me. He certainly is right there with anybody in boxing history. But at the end of the day, I think that a certain amount of fighters, when they take a look at their career, that they will, be comparing it to that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. And that's why certain fighters, they're trying to do things that Floyd never did, like completely unify a weight division like that of Terrence Crawford or Teofimo Lopez or, certain other fighters like that, because they realize that, or Canelo Alvarez, because they realize that Floyd or Manny Pacquiao, for example, the greatest fighters of their generation, that they never ended up unifying a weight division in completion. So once again, that's why, a lot of these fighters now, they're trying to go after unifications, because they see people like Terrence Bud Crawford and some of these other fighters, and they realize that in order to be talked about, or in their view to be talked about that way, that they have to become somewhat of unified fighters. Kind of like Conor McGregor in that of the UFC. He became a champ. He became a guy that, once again became a champion in two separate weight classes. Then all of a sudden, all these other fighters started doing it because they realized that in that generation, at least, that the tide was going to start to turn.
Instead, that would be too easy. So instead, what people do is they just blame Floyd for fights not happening that literally have nothing to do with Floyd, right? So I think...
Well, I'll state this. I'm not blaming Floyd Mayweather Jr. necessarily, but I think that Floyd, because he was such an impact and because he was such a great fighter, just like Michael Jordan for his sport and just like because of other figures for their sport, I think that there was a little bit of a negative carry-on or a little bit of a negative impact because of that. Not intentionally, but just because sometimes that just ends up happening.
Losses in boxing are oftentimes dramatized. It's like a movie.
Get your taxes done in a snap with the TurboTax app. Get your max refund and
When you see a movie and then elements of the movie, even if it's based on a true story, elements of that movie might be Hollywood, where they were ad-libbing. Like, this scene didn't actually happen in real life. Like, let's say it's a paranormal, you know, those paranormal movies, like Paranormal Activity, right? And then even if it's based on a true story, there's going to be a lot of it that is sensationalized or fictitious. Like, this element of it, did the ghost really come out and say, F you, get out of the house? Ah! Like, did that really happen in the true story and the two accounts of what happened? Probably not, right? And I also feel like you kind of get that sensationalism in boxing when it comes to people losing. Joseph Parker's a former champion. Wilder was on a long late.
Right, he's a former champion, but he's also a guy that was a former champion about 7 to 10 years ago. So let's keep it in proper perspective here. All right, once again, if this were a fighter like Usyk or something like that, we already know what you'd be saying.
I told you exactly what went on.
Now, I don't completely disagree with Mr. Ego here. I think that Wilder, I think that the losses to Tyson Fury, and I also think that his layoff, I don't think that those help matters. So once again, I think that, that's a fair point to bring up towards Deontay Wilder. But let's not sit here and act like Joseph Parker was just at the peak form of his career. Joseph Parker had lost every big fight that he had ever been in. And when I say big fight, I'm talking about guys that could actually potentially beat him. He lost every single one. He lost to Dillian White. He lost to Joe Joyce. He lost to Anthony Joshua. He may even lost to one other guy, but I can't necessarily remember. Anyways, he lost every single one of those fights, and he was brutally stopped against that of Joe Joyce. Okay? And Wilder fought that guy. He was supposed to win that fight.
It's not surprising. Styles make fights. There was a lot of pressure on Wilder to perform because Wilder was the man who was in line to fight Anthony Joshua if he got past this.
And by the way, once again, after that fight, unless Deontay Wilder ends up redeeming himself in his career or actually defeating Anthony Joshua, in my view, at the very least, he will never be remembered as great or as impactful as Anthony Joshua. Period. And people can like that. People cannot like that. The Wilder fans, and listen, the AJ fans are not innocent either. But the Wilder fans and the AJ fans, they've been trying to tear each other down overall for many years, and that just happens in a debate. But at the end of the day, when you take a look at the debate logically and objectively, you would have to put Anthony Joshua over Wilder. Because AJ actually defeated Joseph Parker, and that was when he was a champion. AJ has defeated way more better names on his resume. He's had more belts. He's had way greater competition on his resume. He's probably the more skilled fighter of the two. There's just no argument at this point to put Deontay Wilder over Anthony Joshua. There's none.
So you got pressure, you got absence and inactivity, you got the fact that Joseph Parker had a good strategy with Andy Lee and a good game plan. I mean, it's not really that far-fetched. So to drop him 6-7 spots, I don't know if that's justified. We've seen.
Of course it's justified. Is Joseph Parker looked at the best point in time in his career when he fought Deontay Wilder? And certain people can tell you this shit about, well, Joseph Parker improved and all sort of stuff. Right, so where was that improvement against Joe Joyce about a year ago? Where was that improvement? You're telling me that he ended up improving against these bums? These guys that I had never heard of? Or these guys that a lot of people had never ever heard of? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that maybe Parker did not improve a little bit. But how many of you guys would favor Joseph Parker against, Tyson Fury right now, or Alexander Usyk, or against that of AJ Anthony Joshua right now, at least the best version of him? Philip Hergovich and all these other guys. How many of you guys would really favor Joseph Parker over those fighters? I'm not sure if I'd favor him over any of them. So let's not sit here and pretend that Joseph Parker was just a peach and at the best point in time in his career, because that's not honest. That's not the truth.
Like, let's say Joe Joyce.
Or at least overall that he was not clearly at the peak point in time in his career. Now, if you believe that this is Joseph Parker at the best point in time in his career, that's up to you. But I'm not going to go on that narrative because just a year ago, I seen Joseph Parker get completely dominated and stopped in very dominant fashion.
Joyce got knocked out by Zhang 2 times in a row, right? Back to back. And then the second fight was worse. You got fighters like the WBC guy, Ajit Kabiel. Listen, he has one good performance off of, he's number 4 off of one good performance against a guy that was hyped up that really hadn't proven anything. All he did was look scary, right? FA.
Well, Mr. Boxing Ego, you're really describing Deontay Wilder's whole entire career. Because that win, other than Luis Ortiz, what the hell has Deontay Wilder really ever done in terms of beating actual caliber competition? You know, and people are going to get mad at me for this and all this other stuff. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of Deontay Wilder fans that are saying, you know, why are you hating on Deontay Wilder, all this other shit. Well, if you know, once again, I don't hate on anybody. All I do is just tell things from my perspective. If you can tell me one other fighter that he ever beat that actually had decent caliber overall talent other than that of Luis Ortiz, please tell me overall, you know, who that name was. Because Bermain Stavern, is he really a guy that is a great fighter? Or is he a guy that beat that one fat ass Chris Arreola overall for the title, and then Deontay Wilder pretty much got it over him? Is Bermain Stavern really going to defeat a lot of other elite level champions? Is he really going to do it? We know damn well that he's not going to. So let's stop. You know, what was it? Was it overall Juan Duapas? Was it Eric Molina? Like which one of these guys, you know, Artur Spiltzka, like which one of these guys that Deontay Wilder fought other than Luis Ortiz, you know, were these guys to where he got more than one great win? Mr. Boxing Ego, and I understand your point. I'm not sure if I would say that Caballel is over that of Wilder either, but if we're really going to be real about Wilder, what big wins does he really have in his career other than Luis Ortiz? The answer is none.
Jogba, he's been kind of inactive. He looked pretty bad versus Frank Sanchez. Now, I can't say anything against Frank Sanchez because he's been doing his thing. He keeps winning. But
Anthony Joshua, Frank Sanchez, and Joseph Parker, those are the ones that you for sure cannot debate are over overall that of Deontay Wilder. They're deservingly over that of Deontay Wilder. Now, if you want to maybe debate, you know, Caballel or F.A. Jogba especially, or, you know, some of those guys, then I would get it. But even then, I kind of understand. F.A. Jogba has only suffered one loss as of recent. I can't really remember who all he's fought as of recent, but I know that he's gotten a couple more wins in the table. Ejit Caballel, you know, whatever his name is, he recently, beat a guy that was a very highly touted prospect. Yes, I thought he was a bit overrated as well, but at the end of the day, he ended up defeating him. Wilder has not done much lately other than suffered, 3 losses within the past few years?
you can't say he's fought top level. So, I don't know. These rankings look kind of weird. But at the end of the day, you know,
no living being should ever eat processed food for every single meal of their life.
you know, it sucks for Wilder, but it was on Wilder. The onus was on Wilder to perform to get.
I agree, the onus was on Deontay Wilder, and he can't blame anyone else other than himself. And it happens. Losses ended up happening. You know, it is what it is. It's a part of life. But you can't complain overall when your boy Deontay Wilder ends up getting deranked within that of the top 5 because he ended up losing in dominant fashion. Like, it's not even like he just lost. And even then, it would have been deserving to possibly derank him out of the top 5 against a fighter that had no belt and against a fighter that probably was not even in the top 10 anymore in that weight division until he ended up getting that victory again. You know, but then when it came down to it, you know, then he got dominated from round 1 to round 12. Like, damn near lost every single round if he didn't lose every single round. Like, I'm sorry, but I can't have much sympathy here or claim, you know, overall that it's too weird when overall, once again, what has Deontay Wilder really done within the past few years?
That Joshua fight. Now they're happily moving on, in my opinion, and they've made the Ngannou fight. I don't know that Joshua really, him and his team, really ever wanted to fight against Wilder. And
And I'm not 100% sure how serious Wilder ever was about fighting AJ Anthony Joshua either. The narratives always were that AJ Anthony Joshua was clearly avoiding Wilder and all sorts of shit. Keep in mind that Deontay Wilder at certain times said that he would not fight AJ Anthony Joshua within that of the UK, and he also turned down the DAZN deal. So keep in mind that Wilder was not always super serious about fighting AJ Anthony Joshua either.
Wilder, by losing, he allowed them to continue the charade and to look past him. Because, let's be...
To continue what charade? To move past Deontay Wilder and to go probably after bigger and better fights against that of the winner of Tyson Fury versus that, you know, of Alexander Usyk. The point, what would really even be the point of the Deontay Wilder fight? You think that Eddie Hearn is going to put AJ Anthony Joshua in the ring against Wilder, who's always potentially dangerous, when he possibly has that Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk fight right around the corner? You think that they're going to do that?
Real. I mean, you can say whatever you
At the end of the day, had Anthony Joshua ended up losing to that Otto you would have not gave two shits had Deontay Wilder not fought him. So let's stop crying.
want about Joseph Parker. He had a good game plan. He was crafty. He's smaller than Joshua. Joshua was big and like almost robotic and clunky. So the movement and the adjustments that Parker made, styles make fights, right? So who's to say that Joshua would be in and out and moving and, you know, coming in with his head and getting real low and ducking under punches at 6'6" and muscle bound. So that could have been a completely different fight.
And it very much could have been because styles make fights. But at the end of the day, Deontay Wilder is the one that screwed up the bag. He's the one that lost that fight. And he didn't just lose the fight. He had completely lost that fight. Like, literally, it was embarrassing. And I'm not trying to hate on the guy. I'm not trying to, once again, I don't like to kick a man while he's down. Losses ended up happening. And I'm not a professional fighter. I have a lot of respect for any professional fighter out there. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, we can't cry too much for sympathy for Deontay Wilder when he ended up losing that fight, and he could have potentially done more in that fight. You just can't do it.
Now we don't know, and we may never know because they dropped Wilder so low from the top 5, and he ended up losing. So as a result, you got to live with the results. But I think it is an injustice for Wilder, a lot of it, because I also...
If anything's an injustice, it's because of the LDBC and new media lying to Deontay Wilder's face, which overall basically made sure that he was not going to improve himself as a fighter, and Deontay Wilder himself for trusting, unfortunately, a lot of these idiots that had no other interest overall than their pro-racial egos when it came down to it, and then on top of that, not really improving his game until it was way too late.
Also feel Wilder is like too brave for his own good. And so is guys like Errol Spence. And this really, I'm going to keep it relatively short because I don't want to make the video too long. But at the end of the day, these fighters got to smarten up in that regard because when you're winning, it's all...
I agree. Deontay Wilder overall should have took a tune-up fight or two before he took a fight like that against Joseph Parker. But even then, he still should have won that fight. And even you said, Ego, in your view, that it was an upset and that Wilder probably should have won the fight, but he didn't.
People asking for autographs and stuff like that. But boxing is a mean and cruel sport. And when you start losing or when you look bad or pathetic in a performance, they completely write you off. And you did all this stuff to appease them, appease the fans, appease boxing Twitter. And then when you lose, like, let's say Stephen Fulton, he got cooked by Inoue, right? Tyson Fury was playing games. You still pursued him, and then you lose 2 times on the back half of the trilogy, and then he goes on. He's making all the money in Saudi with Usyk, and he continues. And then now Wilder's stuck picking up the pieces because he kept taking risks and risks that other people wouldn't take. Like, let's be real. Wilder fought a former champion off a long layoff in 1 round.
And the guy that had got knocked out in brutal fashion just a year ago. Quit trying to frame it in this point overall to where Joseph Parker was this major threat overall to a lot of the heavyweight division. Dude, Wilder was expected to knock this dude clean out within that of 6 rounds. At the end of the day, it just is what it is. And I know a certain amount of people would disagree with me. Dude, if this was Filip Hrgovic or something, or if this was like, if this was someone like a Dillian White even, I would get it. I would understand. But, dude, Joseph Parker had not been super duper relevant, at least to the top ranks of the heavyweight division, really in years. And I know that people are going to disagree with me. But what was Joseph Parker's major accomplishments really recently within the heavyweight division? Getting wins over Junior Fa and getting wins over Derek Chisora? Like, who gives a shit?
1 round with Robert Helenius. 1 round. He came in with 1 round versus Helenius, and that's the only amount of activity he had in several years. Look it up. And he came back and fought a guy like Joseph Parker, who's durable, crafty.
And once again, Mr. Ego, you should have that of the same sympathy for Deontay Wilder like you do with some of the fighters that you don't support, like that of Tyson Fury. Remember, you said, well, if Tyson Fury, if he didn't end up training for that of Ngannou, if he didn't take him seriously, that's his fault. I don't have any sympathy for him. Right, you should have the same standards for Deontay Wilder.
Move, can punch a bit, things like that. Do you think Canelo would fight a former champion that was still not completely out of it? Do you think Canelo would come in and fight David Benavidez? But then you got guys like Errol Spence Jr., and guess what?
Right, but this was not a Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez type of fight. What this would have been is Canelo Alvarez versus John Ryder. That's pretty much what this fight was, or even really lesser, if you want to go there. That's what it would have been, kind of like. But Wilder, of course, is not on the same level of Canelo Alvarez, nowhere near. So, and basically what I mean by that is that I can't really make it comparatively because I really don't even know how I would compare it.
Errol Spence Jr. fighting one of the toughest outs in the welterweight division, if not the toughest out, in Crawford, off of injury, off of inactivity. Wilder's coming off of 1 round and pretty much inactivity, fighting a former champion in a fight where that guy could spoil things for the Joshua bag. But everyone else, no one else is doing that. Like, let's say Jaime Munguia. Jaime Munguia this weekend is fighting against John Ryder, who he's coming off a loss to Canelo, right? Joseph Parker fought like 4 times last year, so he had activity coming off of the loss to Joe Joyce, so he was far more active. He even fought in Saudi Arabia like 50 days before he fought Wilder in Saudi Arabia. So these fighters, their teams, and their decision-making has to smarten up because once you're out the picture, you see what happens next. They steamroll you. They took Wilder out the top 5. WBC moves on, ranks everyone in front of you. The fans act like they forget about you. And this is, kind of because you're too tough or bold for your own good. If I were Wilder, I would have taken an absolute cupcake just to not spoil the bag with Joshua. And people can complain like, oh, why is he fighting?
I overall definitely would have taken a tune-up if I were that Deontay Wilder. Now, I'm not going to say that Joseph Parker was going to be a cupcake ever for Deontay Wilder, but he certainly was a fighter that was not expected to do what he was going to do, at least overall by me or a certain amount of other people. Now, to be fair, there was a lot of people that said that, you know what, this fight could potentially go either way. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, this fight was not looked at as a potentially tough fight. But let's also not sit here and pretend like Joseph Parker was undefeated and hadn't been stopped just a year prior. Joseph Parker was expected to get knocked out in this fight.
Oh, lesser competition, but this is why it's extremely dangerous to fight somebody who's because even fighting a Joseph Parker, what if you get cut? What if you get an injury? That messes up your Joshua. It's not even just losing. You fight someone who's too hard and too dangerous.
And keep in mind that Anthony Joshua also had fought Otto Wallin. When it came down to it, Otto Wallin was undefeated, gave Tyson Fury a very tough fight. Or excuse me, he was not undefeated, but he had only had 1 loss on his resume. He was a sparring partner of Anthony Joshua. And on top of that, he gave Tyson Fury a very rough and tough fight. That's the fighter that Anthony Joshua was facing. And Anthony Joshua was able to take care of business within 5 rounds. Deontay Wilder was not.
Your rounds might be too tough. Even in a victory, you might get cut. You might get an injury. You might, expose more vulnerabilities. So realistically and strategically, I think Wilder and other fighters like Errol Spence, if they have a big mega match, they need to enter it in the best possible way, in the best mind space, physical condition. If Errol couldn't make 47,
I definitely do overall believe that. I think that overall that Wilder and both Errol Spence Jr., that in order to prepare for their fights a little bit better, because both of those matchups were somewhat relatively dangerous for both of them, with the talent and the experience that both of those fighters brought to the table, they definitely should have had a tune-up at least.
He should have said, oh, to heck with these 147 belts. Crawford got to fight me at 54. I'm not comfortably making this. Or let me get a tune-up because you just fought David Avocado in December. Why I can't get no tune-up? But these fighters are prideful and, spiteful and defiant, and they don't do these things. And then now they're dropping you out the top 5. Just my thoughts.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. But once again, Wilder did get dropped out of the top 5 WBC. That doesn't mean that I would put every single one of those fighters ahead of him. But once again, we have to know the difference between what is a quote-unquote injustice or what are double standards, and sometimes when something is warranted. Like a lot of people are bitch moaning and complaining about Naoya Inoue being fighter of the year or Wilder being outside of the top 5, when to be quite honest with you, these things are well warranted, or you could easily debate these things. Now, if you're talking about a fighter like AJ Anthony Joshua right now being dropped out of the top 5 rankings, that would not make sense. If you're talking about overall, Canelo Alvarez being fighter of the year this year, that wouldn't make any sense. those would be things that you could look at as injustices or things that are very highly inconsistent, or double standards, but not things overall to where they could make possible sense, like in a way being fighter of the year or Wilder being dropped out of the top 5 against a guy that had just lost by dominant knockout, against a guy that also would have not been ranked within the top 5 of the heavyweight division just last year. So I'm sorry, but I can't whine and complain about these things, because at the end of the day, those things at least make sense. Now, if you're talking about, a fighter that is completely unknown and isn't accomplished, or just a fighter that hasn't quite been there yet. Like if you're talking about a fighter like Virgil Ortiz and he's being ranked over certain fighters like Shakur Stevenson and Devin Haney, then yeah, that's certainly something that, warrants the, that of criticism. But not some of this other stuff to where you could clearly debate it. And, as analyzers, I don't care what demographic you are. We have to be, logical and objective, and we have to know the difference between what is warranted and what overall could be argued or debated, and what could be debated and what is an injustice or clear double standards. You have to know the difference, and oftentimes people do not, because they're way too emotional and they're way too much in their racial pride and their racial narrative, especially in the sport of boxing. But it is what it is. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.